So, ladies and gentlemen, it would be rather unnecessary to note that during the Middle Ages, the popular culture that vividly survived in the agrarian societies preserved the pagan customs despite the disagreement, usually offensive, of the church and the dogma. In this context, a German preacher, Berthold of Regensburg, signals in a treatise written in 1250 that, this is the Latin text, you should not worship in any way neither the Hulden, nor the Unhulden, or Pilvits, Nachtfahren, Nachtruven, Maren, Truten. They are all demons. The author evidently refers to the tradition of preparing a table with offerings dedicated to supernatural beings. It is usually cited in the clerical literature as mensas cum dapibus indomibus preparare, or more simply mensas ornare, and it was a common motive for ecclesiastical authors of the Middle Ages. Saint Caesarius of Arles, Saint Boniface, 7th century, Pseudo-Augustinus of 18th century, the Pseudo-Eligius of 5th century, Atto of Vercelli, 7th century, and Saint Ive of Chartres, 11th century, are some of those who make reference to this pagan and dogmatically illegal habit. It was mostly practiced during the 12 days of Christmas, the period between Christmas and Epiphany. Having replaced an ensemble of pagan festivities related to the winter solstice, this period signified the return of the dead and the appearance of supernatural beings and deities wandering in the villages, named by the inhabitants as holy and benevolent, Hulden, as we saw in the text, or unholy and malevolent, Unhulden. After these two general categories, Berthold mentions the Pilvits. Pilvits is mostly translated as dwarf. The name, on the contrary, is of complex nature. First of all, it can be manifested under an important amount of alternatives. In Middle High German poem, it is referred as Pilvits. Pilvis, Bulversberg, Bulversin, Pilvirten, Pilvirtsoten. It can also appear as Pilweis, Pilvitsen, Bulgsan, Bilvit, and Bilvit. The second etymon is of the word vit, means white, a Middle English word which derives from the Old English and is relevant to the Gothic vites used by Ulfilas for the translation of the Greek word pragma, think. It is also relevant to Norse fetir, used mostly in land fetir, which means genius loci, spirit of the land. Thus, white generally signifies the spirits and more specifically the small demonic being. The second etymon, Pil or Bil, derives from the Norse name Bil, a Scandinavian goddess attested in the prose Edda of Snorri Sturluson as a personification of the moon and its phases. Pilvits, which is not usual in the German medieval literature of the 13th it's not unusual in the German medieval literature of the 13th and ecclesiastic texts of 14th and 15th century, is mainly represented as a genius loci, that means a spirit attached to a specific place and its protection. According to that, the German historian of 14th century, Thomas Ebbendorfer, informed us about the sacrifice of a child or garment made to the Pilvisbaum, the Pilvis tree. This refugee, linked to a genius loci which inhabits, may describe an elf, a dwarf, a fairy, or an aerial nymph as a proprietor who requires sacrifices. Like an elf or a fairy, it can shoot tiny arrows which cause illness to its victims, or as a lutin, it can tangle the bird and hair of a man or an animal. In addition, Pilvis is also described as penas, that means genius domesticus, that means which means a genius loci, but this time not attached to a tree, a river, or a mountain, but to a house. This combination of different characters are not unusual in the mythological bestiary of supernatural beings. Let's take another example, Schrat. In an anonymous 15th century German treatise, the author refers to the preparation of a table with goodies for the Schrat that will come during the night. also named as Skrat, Skrato, Schrettel, Schrettlein. It can be found in German toponyms such as Schrattenbach and Schrattenberge, that means the Schrats Creek or mountain. This fact proves the existence of a genus loci called under this name. A name, however, which, unlike to Pilvitz, indicates nothing relevant to a genus loci. Schrat can be translated as crier, a motif irrelevant to dwarfs or elves categories, but relevant to the revenant one. The revenant comes back from his grave, wandering in the villages and crying, calling moribunds names. This relationship between the revenant and the vampire and the genus loci must not confuse us, as it is not rare. In Greek traditions, the vrikolakas or vlakodlak, revenant's oriental variation, often lives in a tree. The Schrat mostly appears as a genus loci in many medieval glossaries between 9th and 13th century use the name as a synonym for Silvanus, the man of the forest, Phavnus and Satyrus. It is also called Pilosus, which means hairy, and is a term mainly used to describe a wild man or a being living in the limits of a forest. The Middle High German Waldschrat, that means Schrat of the forest, proves the existence of such an aspect. Moreover, in 1482, a Latin German glossary translates Penates by Schrat, when Michael Beheim, a 15th century Bohemian wandering singer, informs us that every house has its Schrat's line, which increases the fortune, the property and the prestige of those that honor it. Schrat's line means the little Schrat, with an emphasis to its small size, which evokes a dwarf, a kobold, an elf. The honors by the owner of the house is a common motif in narrations concerning the domestic spirit, and is located more or less in the same context with the preparations of the tables. If the spirit is pleased with the offerings, exchange this pleasure in a do ut des procedure to prosperity of any form, money, prestige, good luck. If it is not pleased, it punishes the human being. The choice of such an example was not hazardous. Both Pilvitz and Schrat, as we saw Jenny Loki and often Jenny Domestici, are used as synonyms of the nightmare. Not, of course, the bad dream, but the demon that comes in the night and sits on its victims' chests, pressing them, causing paralysis or even death. We could easily claim that this last demon figures a general category by its own. The forms that a nightmare can adopt are multiple: dwarf, elf, giant, revenant, shadow, fairy, sorceress, lamia, etc. That it is impossible to say how it appears. The only element that seems stable is its action, sitting on chests. An action, however, which can be manifested by many other supernatural beings, such as Pilvitz and Schrat. A 15th century glossary uses as synonym to Schretzel the word Alp, which is frequently used as an alternative of nightmare, is relative to elf and can be found in Albdruck, elf's presso, and Albtraum, elf's dream. Moreover, Hans Wittler, a 15th century Tyrolean author and knight, notices that Schrat is a small child and a spirit which was not baptized. Not being baptized means that somebody cannot rest in peace after his death, and he returns. What is important in this document is a description of Schrat as a child. Similarly, Michael Beheim cites that some people believe that some little children are transformed into Pilvitz, and so does the little Schrat, which rides the cattle and moves from one place to other. Except the correlation between Pilvitz and Schrat, which is renamed small, or the transformation of a child into Schrat, for which the author does not, although defines if it happens after the death of the child or during his life. What is interesting here is the motive of riding an animal in order to move to another place. This one is almost unknown to narrations that concern the elves, the dwarves, and in general the genius Loki, which rides an animal with purpose to cause pain, fatigue, and death, and not to move to another place. The motive of riding an animal as a mode of transport mostly belongs to witches-related narrations. For the 14th century Bohemian author Johannes von Tepler and his poem The Plowman of Bohemia, Pilvis is a synonym of witch, and in an anonymous 14th century German treatise, Da sind die Gebot unseres Herrn, Billwitch is related to the sorceress that steals milk. A German glossary finally uses Belevite, that means Billwitch, as a synonym for Lamia. Lamia is a name of complicated evolution, which through meanings as citizen, monster, genius loci, fairy, ended up signifying the sorceress. This evolution explains the 15th and 16th century titles of treatises such as Viers de Lamis Liber, Magers Panurgia Lamiarum, and Molitors de Lamis et Pitonicis Mulieribus. In this last treatise, we can find a log description of this demonic trip on the back of an animal. The nocturnal transportation to the Sabbath is not a 15th, 16th century fabrication, as Carlo Ginzburg extensively indicated in his famous works. The night battles and ecstasies. Their roots are located in archaic popular and agrarian customs practiced during specific periods and days, going back to the cult of the Great Mother. The reason of these activities is the prosperity, and they included ecstatic, not to say shamanic, practices easy to be found in whole Europe. The participant to such a ceremony was falling asleep, releasing this way his doppelganger, his soul that was beginning its trip, being frequently a member of wandering night courtesies. These latter usually belonged to the tradition of the wild hunting, but at the same time were separate as they were not practiced under the thunderous crash of the wild hunt, but noiselessly guided by a female figure or deity. To take some examples, in France the deity is called Dame Abonde, that means abundance, or Satya, name which derives from satiété, satiety. In Italy she is called Befana, a name which derives from Epiphany, and indicates the period of the deity's action, the 12 days. In Germany, finally, we have Perchta, that means signing, and for whom we learn from a 14th century anonymous and a popular treatise named Mirror of Consciousness, that nourishment is offered to her and soothes to the nightmare and the Schad. Among Perchta, another deity guides the night courtesies, Frau Huld, Hulda, Holda, Hole. We meet this last name quite early in one of the oldest and most archetypal representations of the nightmare, which can be found in the Ingliga saga of Snorri Sturluson, a text written in 1225. This is a fragment. Svektir's son was named Vanlandi, and he took the kingdom after him and ruled over the wealth of Uppsala. He was a great warrior and went far over the land. He had stayed one winter in Finland with Sne the Old, and there he married his daughter Drifa. In the spring he went away, whilst Drifa stayed behind, and he promised to come back after 3 winters, but he came not for 10 winters. Then Drifa had Huld, the witch woman, called to her, and sent Fisbur, hers and Vantladi's son, to Sweden. Drifa paid Huld, the witch woman, to draw Vantladi to Finland with sorcery or else to kill him. When the spell was being furthered, Vantladi was in Uppsala and he had a longing to go to Finland, but his friends and advisors forbade him and said that it uncertainly was Finnish witchcraft, which caused his wanderlust. Then he became sleepy and said that the mare was treading on him. His men sprang up and would help him, but when they came to his head, she trod on his feet, so that they were nigh broken. Then they resorted to the feet, but then she smothered the head, so that he died there. The narration's plot is clear. The necromancer and sorceress Huld sends a demon mare, nightmare, against the king, who is at last pressed to death. It is also clear that the nightmare is malevolent, as it provokes harm and suffocation. Most significant, however, is the name of the sorceress, Huld, which directly evokes an important form, according to Jacob's Grimm Teutonic mythology, of the northern pagan cult known under variant names, hold or holda, hole, huld, huldra, huldu, hulla. The affinity between the Scandinavian huld of the Heimskringlein Frau Hole, who represents Mother Winter in German folklore, is almost certain. The first is a vulva, that means a spakona, a prophetess, a wand-bearer, as the etymology reveals, or a scythe-kona, a woman, as Kona reveals, who practices the scyther. This specific type of magic is one of the three Scandinavian rites, as Régis Boyer points out, and dedicates shamanism and its corporal effects, given that the practitioner falls in a coma, ecstasy, or trance. It also includes shape-shifting, causing ill luck or bad health, and of course summoning a demon through necromantic methods or sending the double, the doppelganger, by shamanic methods. From this last case, we can suppose that Huld does not evoke a demon Mar, but that Mar is herself doubled, her evil soul. This is significant, as the nightmare was very often described as being the anthropomorphic double of an old witch, or the zoomorphic one appearing as an insect, a pig, a horse, and mostly a black cat. Even though Huld appears as a medieval witch, she seems to be quite ancient, linked with the archaic forms of the northern religion as documented by 5 Latin inscriptions of the 3rd century, Anno Domini, found in Germany that cite the name Hludana. In this case, under the name Hludana, the feminine figure is not a sorceress but a deity, connected with the elements and nature, may be related to Hlodun, identical to an earth goddess and mother of the god Thor. This connection with nature is also evident through the reference of Sturlunga saga on somebody called Hulda, who is a giantess, supernatural being, undeniably related to nature. In addition, the Icelandic term Huldufolk, which probably means hidden people from Huldu, pertaining to secrecy, and folk, people, signifies supernatural beings described even today as elves or dwarfs, the little people hidden in the forest and the mountains, attached to nature and related to the important genius loci category. This attachment to the land dominates in many descriptions of Huldra or Huldre, where she is a skjøskra, a lady of Scandinavian folklore, a ruler of the forest, who can appear either as a beautiful wood nymph or as an ugly wood wife. Having a long tail like that of a cow, she was rather malevolent, singing and bathing as a fairy, seducing and killing men. Similar attributes are given in another lady of German folklore, Frau Hole, mostly known through the Grimm's homonym fairy tale. She is a goddess mainly worshipped across Hesse and Thuringia, who appears more or less after the winter solstice during the 12 days between Christmas and Epiphany, dressed in white as a white lady, bringing prosperity to those who are devout and prepare offerings for her. She lives in the forest, being a Sylvatica, near fountains or on mountains as a genius loci, and she can control the weather causing snowfall. When she leaves her shelter, she walks through a village alone or accompanied by a mournful escort of dead children, dogs, pigs, and can be malevolent, torturing and killing those who do not respect ancient taboos of the sacral period, preserving a clean house, not working until late or during specific days, and serving nourishment for her. For those who respect these restrictions, she can be benevolent, bringing good luck, prosperity, and wealth. This dualistic character, in which the prosperous one seems stronger and the nocturnal time of wandering can explain names as Nachtfahren, and Nachtfahren, those who come in the night, and Nachtruven, the woman of the night, which are often named Felices Dominus as well. Going back to the first text examined, we can now explain that what Nachtfahren, Hulden, Unhulden, Pilvitz, Nachtruven, Maren mean. There is finally Truten, which must be explained. The name is used as a synonym for the demon nightmare. In a 15th century glossary, the word replaces incubus, which is translated as the one who lies on, signifying that way the nightmare. In another glossary of the same period, it is described as a being who has flat feet element which interprets the chest heavy pressure and reminds us the Drudenfuss, the Drude's foot, a pentagram symbol used to prevent a Drude's attack. At the same time, it is described as an old sorceress. Hans Winkler, in a 15th century poem, mentions that there are many idiots who say that Toite, in other terms Trude, is an old woman that can suck human blood. This assimilation is not exclusively linked with the witch craze of 15th-16th century, which used to transform any supernatural being into witch and heretic. It is already known in 13th century as Passional, a German collection with legends of saints, informs us that an old woman arrived, a follower of Trude. The name has many variations. It can appear as Drut, Drut, Drude, Druda, Trud, Trude, Trute, Truta. Its etymology is unknown, and it may be linked to the Gothic Trudan, kick, or the Latin Trudo, which means push, force. The word can be also found in Trutenacht, which is translated as night of the Truten, and signifies the Walpurgis, proving that way a very close connection between the nightmare and the sorceress. In Upper Austria, the traditions say that when the Trudes were living into the night in order to ride and press the sleepers, they were supporting their bodies on the wall. The soul was coming out and was going into the houses, pressing so violently the sleeper's chest that this latter was almost suffocated. But in the meantime, if somebody touched the inanimate body of the Trude, she would drop dead backwards. The soul could not return in the body. All these elements linked to the double and the ecstatic practices indicate a close connection between the doppelganger, the sorceress, and the nightmare. In an important text published in Bruges in 1480, Les Évangiles de Quenouille, we learn that if a human is destined to become werewolf, it is very possible that his son will also become one. And if he has daughters and no sons, they will become coq-mère, that means nightmares. This last tradition is similar to another which notices that the seventh son of a family will become a werewolf and the seventh daughter a nightmare. We're not going to touch here on an important subject, which is the sex of the nightmare, but on its atavistic origin. Ginzburg and other before and after him have studied the phenomenon to be born with the capacity of being doubled, to send the soul away, and after that to become a benandati, a sorceress, a nightmare. The sign of this atavistic capacity is the coal, the caput galeatum, literally helmet, a thin filmy membrane, the amnion, that can cover a newborn's head and face immediately after birth. If a child has born with this bonnet as it's called in French, it was gifted of sending its soul away, able to become a sorceress, a nightmare, a werewolf. Moreover, some Greek narrations describe the nightmare as a child with a bonnet, underlining that if somebody stole the bonnet, he could ask for what he wanted, in most cases money. This tradition of prosperity in France replaces the child with a sorceress. It is very old, as it mentioned by Petronius in his Satyricon, and can be explained in two ways. It is very possible that the bonnet is the coal, this condition of the ability to become a nightmare. But why a child? In Gaul, during Roman occupation, is manifested the cult of a spirit, or rather a deity, named Genius Cuculatus, which means hooded spirit. It was depicted as a child covered with a bonnet, and it was a very important factor of prosperity, which according to specialists can be translated by its phallic shape. For us, both explanations seem legitimate, as the nightmare, which is very often described as an old sorceress, is very often described as a hooded dwarf, a little shrat, a little pilvich, a transformed child. By this combination or even connection between two general categories which seem irrelevant, the genius loci and the sorceress, this connection sounds strange. Before closing this brief presentation, we will try to give an answer to paradoxical affinity. From the 15th century and mostly from the 16th century, hag became the term which described par excellence the sorceress who is aged and not a maiden. For that reason, the word is usually preceded by the adjective old. The name is used to describe what nightmare was describing in the beginning, the demon, and more specifically the sorceress Etrude, which sits on its victim's chest and presses it. Thus, in 1696, John Aubrey alerts, it is to prevent the nightmare, viz. The hag, from riding the horses. The 16th century, although did not create the word, but developed existing forms, Hege of the 13th century, Hage of the 14th century, others like Heg and Hag. It is rather a shortened form of the Old English word Hegtese and Hegtise, which is akin to the Middle High German Hexe and the Old Low German Hagatusa and the Old High German Hagatsisa or Hagatsusa, which constitutes the origin of the term. Hagatsusa is a compound word. For many dictionaries, the origin of the first etymon Haga rests obscure. However, it is almost surely linked to the enclosed field, the pasture, the fence, the hedge, which is in the Old English are described by the word Haga. Furthermore, in the Middle High German Hage and Hagen mean thicket. All of these terms refer to the enclosed field which was surrounding the rural house. It was metaphysically charged, especially for the Anglo-Saxon and Germanic traditional societies. In Scandinavia, for example, the fence is called Sun or Tun, which has a similar function. As far as the second stem, Tsusa, is concerned, many interpretations have been proposed. The most valid one is that of Holthausen and Kluge. They consider as the right etymological root the Indo-European dus, which means demon. This one was preserved in particular by the continental Celts as a demon called Dusius or Dosius. On account of the remarkable lack of text, there is an incertitude and perplexity regarding this supernatural being. It is almost unquestionable, however, that Dusius is a rustic deity of bucolic associations. The first document, chronologically in the Augustinian City of God, affirms this assumption. In the 15th century, he considers Dusius as a Gaelic name for Silvanus and Pan. Afterwards, he links all these three rustic demons to incubus. It is very possible that this happens due to their common sexual impulses. Thus, Dusius is a genius loci and at the same time an incubus. Consequently, Hagatsusa etymologically signifies a genius loci that lives in the heads and connects that way the sorceress to the genius loci. That is not an exclusively English or German phenomenon, as in Scandinavia, the sorceress which acts as a nightmare is called Tunrida, that signifies the one who rides the heads. The proof, finally, that Hag was linked to the genius loci can be found in English agrarian traditions of prosperity, where the genius loci of the grain harvest was trapped in the last sheaf of harvest. That sheaf is kept safe till the next year. Then it is given to the plough horses as fodder, so that the spirit will enter the field again for the fertility of the new crop. This genius is called very often grandmother, old wife, granny, harvest lady, harvest queen, etc., and is described as an old woman. In Wales, its name is Hag, and is represented by a puppet made from the last sheaf, dressed with clothes belonging to the farmer, and adorned with a crown and a blue or white scarf. In this case, the crown represents divine grandiosity. The scarf associates the Hag with the supernatural women who wear a veil or a scarf, the Silvatike, the fairies and the winter deities such as Perta, Damabond, Huld. In this quite possible connection between the genius loci and the sorceress, the nightmare and its way of acting seems like the link, which is mysteriously related to the prosperity ecstatic practices of Western Europe. So mysteriously that it seems impossible to be sure on its action's nature, if it participates in rituals or not. Going back to Bertholdt's text, we philologically explain all of the names met there. The affinities, which are not hazardous, are not totally explained yet. Thank you.